Welcome to the final note in our series of notes on importing data into ServiceNow. In this note, I focused on how to schedule a data import to run on a regular occurring basis. Happens all the time. I discussed a scenario in the note. For example, fairly often a company may have an application running in their network. Maybe it's some legacy application, maybe it's some client server application that they aren't going to be able to move over to ServiceNow immediately, but the data that application manages would be helpful, maybe for some other initiative in ServiceNow. The example I provided was maybe you have an IT staffing application that is running in the network and will be for a while, but you need the data from that table that describes IT staff members' names and addresses. You'd like to get that data into ServiceNow, but that system is not going to be turned off anytime soon. We now know how to build an import that would pull that data from that application database into ServiceNow. But what happens tomorrow and the next day and next week and next month as changes are occurring in the source table? We need to get those changes refreshed in ServiceNow. ServiceNow provides useful tools to allow us to schedule our imports so that they run on a regularly occurring basis, so that data can be pulled. Maybe it's nightly, maybe it's more often than that. You can schedule things to happen multiple times throughout the day if you'd like. So you could run that import regularly to refresh that data in ServiceNow so it stays up to date with what's happening in the source system. So we're going to look at that real quickly in this video, and then kind of wrap up this series and talk about all that we've accomplished. So first thing, scheduled data imports. ServiceNow stores, anytime you want to schedule your import to run automatically, you need to create a record in ServiceNow's scheduled data import table. Essentially, all that record's going to do is tell ServiceNow which data import or data source really you're interested in running and how often. When do you want it to run? And then there are a few other parameters you can set for managing or configuring how that scheduled data import job would run. So let's take a look at that table. As I always do, I'm going to use the Application Navigator filter, and I'm going to just type in the name of the table. It's actually scheduled _import _set. Is the name of the table in the database. So scheduled import set dot list. We'll see that I don't have any. We've only created our one import and we haven't scheduled it yet, so I don't have any scheduled jobs. I'm going to try and remember to mention there are other ways to get to these views. I like using the Navigator because it requires me to remember the name of the table that things are stored in. I just like to view things from a kind of a database perspective. It helps me understand what's going on behind the scenes. But you could use the App Navigator if you wanted to, and you can just type in, scheduled imports, for example. And you can see that is under System Import Set, Administration, Scheduled Imports. So this would take you to the exact same place, a view of the records in the scheduled data import table. We have none, and we need to create a new one. Now, just as I've shown you, ServiceNow often provides multiple ways to do things. One way, and the preferred method that I like to add a new scheduled data import, is to do what we just did, come to the list of records for that table, in this case there aren't any, and just simply click the New button. That will create a new record in the scheduled data import table. It builds the form for us to fill in the attributes that we need, and then we're set with our scheduled import. Another way to do this, though, is to access this through the data source itself. So you can see the first thing we're going to have to tell ServiceNow in this record is what data source are you wanting to schedule to kick off regularly. So we could do that by adding a record here. The other way I want to show you is to go to the data source itself, and then they provide a tool from there to do it. So let's do that. I'm going to go to sys_data source.list. You'll see that we have our one data source here that we've created to pull from that Excel file. If I go into the data source, you'll see at the bottom here, under the related lists area here, a scheduled data imports tab selected right here. This is essentially a way for you to schedule this data import to run on a regular basis. It's the exact same thing as if we came from the other spot, just a different way to get here. The only nice thing about coming from here to do it is when I click new here, because we came from the data source, it's going to automatically populate the data source because it knows this is the one that we're scheduling. So the attributes here to fill out, pretty simple. Give it a name. I'm just going to name it test import scheduled. We'll just call it that, test import scheduled. They're probably good naming conventions. I need to take a look around the ServiceNow community and start recommending some of those. It's probably not the best name, but the system doesn't care. You can name it whatever you like. So we'll name it that. Okay, data source we have selected. You could look that up if you wanted to change it, but because we came from the test import data source, it assumes that that's the one we're attempting to schedule. Run as. This run as field allows you to look up any user in the user table in ServiceNow, and you can run the import as that user. I usually leave it at system administrator, but really the thing to consider here is if you have fields in your database that are going to be updated, and you will, like last updated by, last modified by, that record kind of an auditing record of who did what. This allows you to run this. I could run this as myself if I wanted to, and then the changes that it made would be reflected as Jeff Teese doing them rather than system administrator. So that's the purpose of the run as. It really doesn't change the functionality other than it sort of runs the process as that person and then updates those audit records accordingly. Whether or not it's active, do we want to have it turned on or not? Concurrent import. This is, I'll mention this, but I didn't really talk much about it in the previous notes, but you can break your data imports down into multiple import sets if you want. Say you have 5,000 records that you need to pull in. You can actually set your import to pull those in groups. So you may divide them up into 5 different import sets, each one having 1,000 records. If you did do that, this concurrent import would allow you to check that, and that would tell ServiceNow that it's okay to run all 5 of those import sets for that specific import at the same time. Haven't used it much. I need to research it more, but that's what that is. Provides the ability to add a script a JavaScript block of code that you want ran at the beginning of the import. And if you wanted to have one run at the end of the import, maybe you need to prepare the data in some way before it starts, and then you need to clean something up after it runs. Haven't used those much either, but that's what that allows you to do. Biggest things I wanted to mention here are, when do you want this thing to run? You need to tell ServiceNow, and your options here are daily, weekly, monthly, periodically, and depending upon what you choose here, you'll get some additional attributes that you can populate. So we'll just talk about daily, for example, here. If I say I want this to run every day, and then you can give it a time that you want it to run. Maybe you want it to run overnight while things are slower in the activity of that source application, data source. You could set the hour, minute, and second that you want this to kick off, in this case on a daily basis, and it will do that. And then the other one I do want to mention, very important one, is they give you an option for after parent runs. This is nice because this allows you to chain scheduled imports together. So let's say, for example, we're working with that IT staff application, and it's got multiple types of data that we want to pull in. Maybe it's got the user table, or the user data that we're talking about. Maybe it's got some hardware data that that's associated to those users. Maybe it's got software that's associated to the users. Maybe it's got vacation time that's associated to the users. You may have other imports that you've built that are pulling from that system, and you may want to run them in a certain order, kind of all at the same, not at the same time, but all in the same group. You could create the first import to run maybe as daily, and then set it a time. And then you could create the 3 maybe other imports that are related to that system to run after the parent runs. And then you could assign the second one, you could assign the parent to be the first one. And then the third one, you could assign the parent to be the second one. And so you can essentially build a chain of scheduled data jobs so that they'll run one after another based upon this parent-child relationship. So that's handy. I use that quite often. I'm going to go back and just set this to daily to keep this simple, and we'll say the hours are, I don't know. I'm just going to leave it at this. It'll run it, I guess that would be midnight. Conditional allows you to enter some JavaScript code that would be a condition that you wanted to run the import against. So I only want to run the import if this or that has happened. I haven't done much with conditional, but that's what that allows you to do. You could look that up in the documentation and get more information about that, but I'm not going to set a condition. So essentially all I'm saying here is we want to run our test import that we created, excuse me, as the system administrator. We're going to run it daily, and we want it to run at midnight. And yes, it is active, which would mean it'll start tomorrow, first thing in the morning. And then simply submit. And we now have a scheduled data import set. So if I go back to our table, scheduled import set.list, we'll see we now have one scheduled job ready to run. So that's it. That's how you schedule your imports to run automatically. It's a pretty handy thing, and it happens fairly often. With that said, that's the end of this series of notes. Real quickly, just to review what we've covered. The flow of data from a source data entity all the way through all of the entities that we've created to our target destination within ServiceNow. We talked about the source data entity. That's the thing outside of ServiceNow that we want to pull data from. Normally, it's a JDBC database. Might be a file, like our example. We used Excel. There's other file types it supports, or an LDAP org unit. So we've got our data source entity. We created our data source record. That's the first thing we did. That record contains the attributes required for ServiceNow to know how to connect to the source data entity, what data we want to pull, and how we would like for it to create our staging table, our import set table. We talked about the import set table, the fact that it gets created automatically by ServiceNow, and that it acts as a staging area for the data that we've pulled from the source but has not yet been processed or added to the target. Provides improvement in the processing of the import, and it also provides some handy tools that allow us to use the user interface to do the mapping from the source to the target. We then talked about transform maps and field maps. We talked about how a transform map is really a grouping mechanism for multiple field maps, and that the field map records are the field-to-field mappings from the staging table to the target table. So somehow you have to tell ServiceNow what data we want to flow into which fields in the target. That's what the field maps do, and the transform map groups those all together so that you can use that transform map for your specific import. Finally, the ServiceNow target table. That's the place where we identified that we wanted this data to be loaded initially. We talked about how it could be an out-of-the-box table. Maybe it's the user table. Maybe it's a location table. It could be a custom table that we created, as we did in our example. We created our My Table example so that we could load that data into ServiceNow and have it there for our own purposes. And that is it. That is the flow of data from the source to the target and all the entities that we needed to create to make this data source work. So that's it. I'm very thankful for you all joining. I hope you found some use and some value in this series of notes and this series of videos. I hope you'll visit www.jtt0340.com. I'll continue to publish my notes. And as always, I would love feedback. So whether it's good or bad, good feedback's great, bad feedback's better because it helps me get better at hopefully providing some value with these notes and these videos. Again, appreciate you hanging with us through this series of videos, and hopefully I'll see you again at jtt0340.com.